Put your hands behind your back now." The command tore across the quiet sidewalk so hard that people on both sides of the street stopped mid-step and turned, under the blue-red pulse of a patrol car parked crooked at the curb. A tall black man in a faded gray hoodie stood beside a little neighborhood bookstore with a paper bag in one hand and rain still shining on his shoulders. He did not run. He did not argue. He did not even raise his voice. He only looked at the officer standing in front of him, badge glinting under the streetlight, and said, "Officer, I have not done anything wrong." But the officer had already made up his mind. His jaw was tight, his posture hard, his confidence complete. Around them, phones were coming up. A woman at the bus stop covered her mouth. A teenage boy on a scooter stopped dead and started recording. From inside the bookstore, the owner rushed toward the window, horror spreading across her face as she saw the scene unfolding right outside her own door. What nobody on that sidewalk knew, not the officer, not the people filming, not even the dispatcher listening through static in a patrol radio miles away, was that within minutes a single phone call would slam into that moment like a wrecking ball and leave an entire department scrambling to explain what arrogance had set in motion. Before I take you back to how it started, drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever seen someone get judged before anyone asked a single real question, hit like and subscribe to Echo Story. Because this story begins with a lie disguised as law and ends with a truth no one on that street was ready to hear. But to understand why Officer Daniel Mercer felt so certain while clipping handcuffs onto a man who never once resisted, you have to go back 36 minutes to a rainy corner in West Baltimore where one small act of kindness turned into the kind of public humiliation people never forget. The evening had started soft and gray. The kind of rain that never truly storms but settles into everything until the city smells like wet brick, old paper, and traffic. West Baltimore moved at its usual rhythm corner stores glowing under fluorescent light, buses coughing past puddles, tired workers heading home with shoulders bent against drizzle. At the corner of Green and Monroe sat a narrow bookstore called Maple and Pine, its front window fogged from warmth and coffee and old heating pipes that made the place feel older than the block around it. Inside, the owner, a woman in her late 60s named Mrs. Loretta Hayes, was trying to stack a crate of donated hardcovers near the back when the bottom split open and half the book spilled across the floor. She muttered to herself, bent awkwardly, and nearly lost her balance. That was when the quiet man in the gray hoodie stepped in from the rain. He had a simple face, not flashy, not memorable in the way cameras like, but steady in a way life teaches expensively. His name was Malik Rowan. He wore plain jeans, work boots with darkened solace, and a knitted cap damp at the edges. Nothing about him suggested power. Nothing suggested status. If anything, he looked like a man trying to get through the weather unnoticed. "You need a hand with that?" he asked. Mrs. Hayes turned, saw him, and let out a breath of relief. "Only if your back is younger than mine," she said. He smiled faintly, set down the paper bag he'd been carrying, and crouched to gather the books one by one with careful hands, wiping rain from his brow with his sleeve. Through the front window, passing headlights slid over the glass in silver bands. On the sidewalk, a college girl under a yellow umbrella paused to answer a message while filming a quick clip for her social feed. A delivery cyclist leaned under the awning next door, shaking rain from his jacket. And 2 blocks away, Officer Daniel Mercer was already in a patrol car, already bored, already irritated after a long shift full of false alarms and neighborhood complaints, already looking for something he could control before the night ended. None of them knew they were drifting toward the same collision point. Inside Maple and Pine, Malik stacked the recovered books in neat towers, adjusted a crook shelf without being asked, and listened while Mrs. Hayes complained, half laughing about city landlords, leaky pipes, and the fact that her nephew still hadn't fixed the loose back door lock. It should have stayed an ordinary act of decency. It didn't. Mrs. Hayes had known Malik only in fragments, the way neighborhood business owners know certain regulars without ever getting their full story. He came in sometimes near closing, always polite, always quiet, usually buying used biographies or books about architecture, transit, or history. He never lingered like someone trying to be seen. He asked thoughtful questions, paid in cash more often than card, and once donated a box of children's books without leaving a name. Tonight, after helping her restack the spill, he noticed the metal cash box near the register was missing its usual place under the counter. "You move that?" he asked casually. Mrs. Hayes froze. Her eyes darted toward the open office nook behind the register. "No," the word came out thin. They both looked. The office drawer was slightly open. The loose back door she had mentioned a minute earlier now stood cracked to the alley. Rain blowing in, Mrs. Hayes hurried over, hands trembling. The cash box was gone. Her face dropped. "No, no, no," she whispered, then louder. "That boy from the alley?" "I left the door, oh Lord." Malik moved fast but stayed calm. He stepped to the back door, looked into the alley, then back at her. "Call it in," he said. "Now." But older panic doesn't always obey useful instructions. Mrs. Hayes was flustered, fumbling for her phone, dropping it once, hands shaking too hard to unlock the screen. Malik picked up the phone, opened the emergency dial, and held it out. She took it and finally got through, stumbling over her address, saying the cash box had just been taken. While she talked, Malik stepped into the rain-slick alley and saw a teenage kid sprinting between dumpsters, clutching something metal under his jacket. "Hey!" he shouted once, not in anger but in instinct. The kid ran harder. Malik took off after him for half a block, then stopped when he saw the boy vault a fence into a construction lot. He could have climbed it. He didn't. Instead, he stood breathing hard in the rain, stared over the fence, then turned back. That choice would matter later because it showed who he was. He wasn't chasing punishment. He was trying to protect an old woman's livelihood. But by the time he returned to the sidewalk, the first patrol car was already rolling up. Mrs. Hayes was outside now, distraught, trying to explain between breaths that someone had stolen from the store. Malik still held the brown paper bag she'd insisted he take inside. It were the 2 books he had bought and a wrapped lemon scone she'd added for free. The rain glistened on his sleeves. The streetlight caught the hood of his sweatshirt. And Officer Mercer, stepping out of the cruiser with tired suspicion already in his eyes, took in the entire scene in one glance and reached the wrong conclusion before either of them had spoken. There is a look some people wear when they believe they already know the story. Officer Daniel Mercer wore it the moment his boots hit the wet pavement. He was in his late 30s, broad through the shoulders, neat haircut, clipped movements, and the practiced tone of a man who liked being the loudest certainty in any tense situation. He saw a frightened older store owner, an open back door, a reported theft, and a black man standing outside in a hoodie holding a bag. That was enough for him. "Set the bag down," he said before Mrs. Hayes could even finish, pointing 2 fingers toward the ground. Malik looked at him steadily. "I'm the one who helped her call it in. Set the bag down?" Mrs. Hayes stepped forward. "Officer, no, you don't understand. He was helping me." Mercer lifted a hand without looking at her. "Ma'am, step back." That one gesture changed the scene from confusion to humiliation. A man who had just helped her was now being treated like the threat in front of her. The college girl with the yellow umbrella slowed again, sensing something raw in the air, and quietly switched from texting to recording. Across the street, a city bus hissed to a stop and 3 passengers remained by the window to watch. Malik bent down, placed the paper bag carefully on the sidewalk, and straightened. "Ask her what happened," he said. His voice was even. No heat, no attitude, just a request for sequence and fact. Mercer moved closer anyway. "What happened?" he said. "Is I arrived at an active theft scene and found you standing here with property." "Property I bought," Malik replied. "And a thief just ran through the alley," Mrs. Hayes added quickly. "He chased him?" Mercer finally looked at her then, but only briefly. And in that glance lived a kind of dismissive impatience people mistake for professionalism when they've seen it too often. "Ma'am, we'll get your statement." He turned back to Malik. "ID." Malik took out his wallet slowly, handed over a driver's license, and said nothing. Mercer studied it, then studied him again as if the card itself had become suspicious by being attached to the wrong man. Rain ticked softly off the squad car roof. The yellow umbrella girl stepped farther under an awning and raised her phone higher. From inside the bookstore, a younger clerk named Elena Ruiz appeared at the door, apron still on, face tense. She had been in the back making tea when the cash box vanished. Now she looked from Malik to the officer and immediately understood the shape of the mistake before anyone admitted it. But mistakes backed by authority rarely stop when witnesses notice. They usually get louder first. Turn around. Mercer said it like procedure had already reached its final stage. Malik blinked once, not in fear but in disbelief that facts were being skipped so completely. For what? He asked. Mercer's expression hardened with the satisfaction some officers get when a question sounds close enough to resistance that they can escalate without feeling guilty. Don't do that, he said. Don't play games with me. Mrs. Hayes took another step forward, one hand pressed to her chest. Officer, please listen to me. He didn't steal from me. He helped me. I saw the other boy run. Elena came out beside her now, rain hitting her dark hair as she shook her head. I saw him too, she said. A teenager in a red jacket. He went through the alley. Mercer didn't even write it down. He was still staring at Malik, whose calm seemed to irritate him more than anger would have. You match the description. Elena frowned openly. What description? Nobody gave you one yet. That should have embarrassed him. Instead, it made him more rigid. Sir, Mercer said, louder now for the gathering sidewalk audience, if you are not involved, then complying will clear that up very quickly. The line was old, so old it was almost tired. But under flashing lights and public pressure, old lines still work because they let authority sound reasonable while doing something unreasonable. Malik glanced at Mrs. Hayes, who looked close to tears. He glanced at Elena, whose jaw was tightening by the second. Then he looked back at Mercer and said, I will comply. But you are making a mistake. The college girl's camera caught every word. The delivery cyclist under the awning muttered, Damn, under his breath. The bus pulled away, but not before two riders had pressed their phones to the glass. Mercer stepped behind Malik and cuffed him with more force than necessary, metal clicking loud enough to make the whole block feel smaller. Malik's shoulders tightened once at the sting, then settled. He did not flinch. He did not curse. He did not pull away. He just stood there in the rain with his hands pinned behind him while strangers watched a good man be reduced to a threat because one officer believed certainty mattered more than listening. It was in that stillness, with cold cuffs on his wrists and the wrong story hardening in public, that Malik's mind flickered back years to another night, another authority figure, another moment when anger would only have been used as confirmation. He had learned then that the first battle in a humiliating moment is often internal, not whether you are right, but whether you will let someone else's ignorance decide how much of your dignity they get to touch. 15 years earlier, Malik had been 16 and standing on the cracked porch of his mother's apartment building while two officers questioned his older brother, Devin, about a car break-in nobody in their family had anything to do with. Devin had gotten angry. Not violent, not threatening, just angry in the way people become when accused too often and too lazily. One officer had smiled when Devin raised his voice, the smile of a man who felt the story arranging itself in his favor. Malik remembered his mother gripping his shoulder so tightly it hurt and whispering, "Stay quiet. Don't give them your fire." That night ended with bruised pride, a wrongful detention, and a lesson that never left him. Some systems are built to hear composure as suspicious and pain as proof. He grew up with that knowledge like a second spine. He took it into college, into boardrooms, into rooms where people heard his ideas only after hearing his title, and into every professional space where calm was treated as more credible once he dressed it in success. So now, on the rain-dark sidewalk outside Maple and Pine, with Mercer searching the pockets of his hoodie and pulling out nothing but a wallet, keys, and a folded receipt, Malik let the humiliation pass through him without letting it own his face. Elena stepped closer, appalled. "You need to uncuff him," she said. "This is crazy." Mercer ignored her. Mrs. Hayes, breathing unevenly, said, "Officer, that boy ran. This man chased him for me, please." Mercer responded with the same clipped tone people use when they want control more than clarity. "Ma'am, right now I need everyone to calm down." It was almost insulting in its neatness. The crowd had thickened, now neighbors under umbrellas. A man stepping out of the barber shop next door, the college girl still filming, and a middle-aged black woman carrying grocery bags who stopped, took in the scene, and immediately planted herself near the curb with the rigid stillness of someone who had seen too many versions of this to pass by. This woman, Nadine Brooks, would become the moral witness the moment badly needed. "Officer," she said, voice firm and low, "you need to hear the woman whose money got stolen." Mercer flicked his eyes toward her, annoyed at the intrusion. "Ma'am, keep moving." Nadine did not move. "No," she said it softly, but it landed like a nail driven into wood. "Not when you're arresting the wrong man in front of half the block." The rain kept falling. The red-blue lights kept flashing. And somewhere inside Mercer's patrol car, the mounted computer terminal pinged with an incoming update he didn't yet see because arrogance had already become his tunnel vision. Officer Mercer finally grabbed the paper bag from the sidewalk and opened it with the performative confidence of a man expecting vindication. Inside were 2 books wrapped in receipt paper and a lemon scone still warm enough to give off a faint buttery scent. He stared for 1 second too long. Elena spoke before anyone else. "He bought those 10 minutes ago." Mrs. Hayes nodded hard. "I put the scone in myself." The crowd murmured. Nadine Brooks shifted her grocery bags to one hand and gave Mercer a look that said more than words needed to. The college girl whispered to her recording, "This is unbelievable." Mercer set the bag on the hood of the cruiser as though the bag itself had personally insulted him. A second patrol unit arrived, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Out stepped Officer Reed Hollis, younger, less hardened, still alert enough to notice when a scene doesn't match the confidence of the first officer narrating it. "What do we have?" he asked. Mercer did not like that question because it forced him to summarize weak facts into strong claims. "Possible theft suspect detained pending witness clarification," he said. It sounded official. It also sounded thinner than he wanted. Reed looked at Mrs. Hayes, at Elena, at Malik standing cuffed and dry-eyed in the rain, then at the open bag on the cruiser hood. "Sir, resist?" Reed asked quietly. "No," said Nadine before Mercer could answer. "He stood here and got handcuffed while y'all ignored the actual victim." Reed's eyes flicked toward Mercer. The tension between them was subtle but real. Mercer leaned in toward Malik, lowering his voice only enough to make the threat feel personal. "See, this is how this goes. If you're clean, it gets sorted. If you start making it difficult, it gets worse." Malik looked at him with a tired kind of patience. "You keep talking as if you started with evidence," he said. Reed heard that. So did the phone, still recording from every angle. Mercer's jaw flexed. "Search the alley?" he barked at Reed, eager to be seen doing something active instead of wrong. Reed obeyed, though slowly, taking a flashlight and moving toward the back of the store. Elena turned to Malik, voice shaking with helpless anger. "I'm so sorry." Malik gave the smallest shake of his head. "Tell the truth," he said. "That's enough." Those 3 words hit her harder than any demand for rescue could have. Mrs. Hayes began crying in earnest now, ashamed and frightened all at once. Nadine set her groceries under the awning and stepped closer to her, resting a hand on her shoulder. And above it all, that unnoticed patrol car ping sounded again, this time followed by a dispatch tone. Mercer still didn't check it. He was too busy protecting the version of events he had created. Inside the bookstore, Elena Ruiz moved like someone whose body had chosen action before her fear caught up. She went straight to the office nook where an old security monitor sat above a metal filing cabinet and rewound the camera feed with shaky fingers. The store's camera system was outdated, grainy, and slightly delayed, but functional enough to show the cash box sitting under the register, the back office door easing open, and a teenage figure in a red jacket slipping in from the alley while Mrs. Hayes was distracted near the stacks. Then Malik entered through the front, helped with the books, noticed the back door, and only later ran into the alley after the thief bolted. Elena stared at the screen, heartbeat pounding. It was all there. Not in perfect resolution, but clear enough. She grabbed her phone, filmed the monitor, and rushed back outside into the rain. "I have video," she shouted. The whole sidewalk turned. Mercer looked at her with the instant irritation of someone who understands on some level that evidence has stopped being theoretical. "Bring it here." Elena didn't move toward him first. She moved toward Reed, who had just returned from the alley holding nothing but a red knit glove in frustration. "Officer," she said to Reed, breathing fast, "the camera got it." The actual thief. "This man didn't take anything." Reed took the phone. His eyes scanned the clip once, then again, slower. The scene around him changed immediately in his face. "Daniel," he said, no longer using rank, "you need to look at this." Mercer did, but not like a man receiving correction. More like a man searching for a loophole. "This doesn't show what happened before." Reed stared at him. "It shows enough." Nadine let out a short breath through her nose, the sound of restrained fury. The college girl stepped closer, zooming in on Mercer's expression. Mrs. Hayes wiped tears from her cheeks. "Uncuff him," she whispered. Then louder, surprising even herself, "Uncuff him." Malik stood still, water darkening the shoulders of his hoodie, face composed in a way that made the whole scene more painful. Because there is something especially brutal about seeing innocence hold itself together while people debate whether proof is sufficient to stop harming it. Mercer looked around and must have felt, for the first time, that the crowd was no longer an audience he controlled. It was becoming a record. But instead of backing down cleanly, he did what pride often does when trapped. He doubled down sideways. "We still need to verify identity and run him for possible outstanding warrants before release." Reed blinked. Nadine's mouth opened in disbelief. Elena actually laughed once, a short, broken sound from shock more than humor. Malik closed his eyes for the briefest second, then opened them again. The call that would change everything was now less than 2 minutes away, at police headquarters across town. Assistant Chief Marissa Cole stood in a conference room reviewing a set of transportation security briefings with 2 city attorneys and a representative from a private infrastructure consortium. They were preparing for a closed-door meeting scheduled the next morning about the largest transit redevelopment contract the city had seen in decades. The lead architect, lead funder, and public oversight chair attached to that project had insisted on attending in person, despite keeping a famously low profile. On the screen, among schematics and project summaries, sat one name that made even City Hall speak carefully: Malik Rowan, founder and chairman of Rowan Civic Infrastructure. $1 billion portfolio. National reputation for rebuilding neglected public systems. Federal advisory work. Known for surprise site visits, unannounced audits, and an almost irritating refusal to travel with an entourage. Marissa's phone buzzed with a message from her executive aide. "Have you confirmed pickup from Mr. Rowan from site visit?" "He's not responding." Marissa frowned. Malik Rowan had flown in quietly that morning and declined city security, saying he wanted to see the neighborhood as people actually live it. That sounded like him from everything she'd heard. She was about to reply when another incoming message from transportation staff arrived. Maple and Pine meeting complete. Donor packet still pending signature. Marissa looked up sharply. Maple and Pine, she had seen that on the schedule. Rohan had visited the bookstore because he was quietly funding its building, restoration as part of a community corridor preservation grant. She picked up her phone and dialed his direct number. Out on Green Street, beneath flashing lights and gathering outrage, that phone began vibrating inside Malik's confiscated jacket pocket on the hood of Officer Mercer's cruiser. Mercer glanced at it. The screen lit with a name he did not recognize but should have, Assistant Chief Marissa Cole. He frowned and let it ring out. Nadine saw the name reflected on the wet hood. Reed saw it too. Neither said anything yet, but the air seemed to pull tight around the glowing screen. A second later it rang again. Mercer hit silence this time. "Why is the assistant chief calling his phone?" Reed asked, voice suddenly different. Mercer didn't answer. He pulled the jacket closer to himself as if possession could become explanation. Malik watched the entire exchange without panic, which somehow made it feel even bigger. "Officer," he said quietly, "you should answer that." Mercer ignored him. The third call came 30 seconds later. Then dispatch crackled through the car speaker requesting immediate status update on detained subject. Reed looked from the flashing console to the phone to Malik's face and began, at last, to understand that this was no longer merely a wrongful street arrest. "It was the opening collapse of a much larger lie," answered the phone. This time it was Reed who said it. Not Malik. Mercer shot him a warning look, but the fourth call was already coming in. And with every ring the crowd seemed to lean closer. Nadine picked up her grocery bags but didn't leave. Elena held her own phone in one hand and the store camera clip in the other like twin pieces of truth. Mrs. Hayes looked between the officers, terrified now not just for Malik but for what kind of machinery she had watched grind onto him. Mercer finally grabbed the phone and answered with the stiff impatience of someone determined to stay in charge. "This is Officer Mercer." The voice on the other end came so sharp and cold that even people standing nearby could hear enough to know the temperature had changed. "Why do you have Mr. Rowan's phone?" Mercer's posture shifted almost invisibly. "Ma'am, we are conducting an active investigation." "No," Assistant Chief Marissa Cole snapped. "You are going to tell me exactly why one of the most important civilian partners this department is working with is in custody at a neighborhood bookstore when he was scheduled to send documents 30 minutes ago." Rain hissed on the pavement. Reed stared. Nadine's eyebrows rose. The college girl filming whispered, "Oh my God," into her own camera. Mercer looked at Malik, then really looked, perhaps for the first time all night, as if some hidden outline might suddenly appear around an ordinary face and explain how badly he had misjudged him. "There appears to have been, He stopped. There was no clean sentence available anymore. Marissa's voice came again, lower now, which somehow made it worse. "Do not say misunderstanding unless you have facts to back it. Is Mr. Rowan injured? Is he handcuffed? Is he under arrest?" Mercer swallowed. Reed answered instead, stepping forward and taking the phone right out of Mercer's hand. "Assistant Chief, this is Officer Hollis. The civilian is handcuffed at present but compliant. New witness video indicates he is not the theft suspect. I am in the process of resolving it." Silence on the line. "Then you are in the process?" Reed closed his eyes for half a second. "Yes, ma'am. Put the phone on speaker." He did. Marissa's voice carried into the rain-dark street with the force of incoming consequence. "Officer Mercer, remove the cuffs." "Right now." The crowd heard it. Elena heard it. Mrs. Hayes pressed both hands to her mouth. Nadine looked at Mercer with no satisfaction, only exhausted vindication. And Malik stood there in the flashing light, while the officer who had publicly reduced him to suspicion fumbled at last for the keys to reverse what should never have happened. The click of the handcuffs opening was quieter than the click of them closing had been, but somehow it echoed farther. Malik brought his hand slowly forward and rubbed one wrist where the metal had bitten red against the skin. He did not dramatize it. He did not fling the cuffs away or spit anger into the moment. He simply reclaimed his own body with deliberate calm. Mercer stepped back, face gone pale in the cruiser lights. "Mr. Rowan," he began, but whatever apology he had been about to manufacture died when Malik looked at him. It was not a threatening look. It was worse. It was tired. "You had witnesses," Malik said. "You had the victim. You had the clerk. You had the store video. And you still needed a phone call." The line hit every person on that sidewalk like a blow because it stripped the incident down to its ugliest truth. Marissa Cole was still on speaker. "Mr. Rowan," she said, and the professional respect in her tone only widened the gap between what Mercer had assumed and who stood before him. "I am deeply sorry. A command-level team is already on the way," Malik answered without heat. "That won't fix the first 10 minutes. Marissa did not try to argue. "No," she said. "It won't." The college girl's camera shook slightly in her hand. Reed stared at the ground. Nadine looked at Malik with the expression of someone witnessing not power exactly, but discipline. The kind that has been forced to mature because losing control in public can become its own trap. Elena stepped beside Mrs. Hayes, who now seemed too shaken to stand without support. "I kept telling him," Mrs. Hayes whispered, voice torn with guilt. "I kept telling him you helped me." Malik turned to her immediately, and for the first time that night his face softened. "This is not your shame," he said. The words nearly broke her. Mercer opened his mouth again. "Sir, if I had known," Malik cut him off with one calm sentence. "That is exactly the problem." Nadine closed her eyes once, just briefly, because she knew a truth when she heard one land clean. Reed reached for the paper bag, the books, the wallet, the things that had been treated like evidence and were now obviously just a man's evening. He handed them back carefully. Malik took them, looked at the 2 books Mrs. Hayes had sold him, one about city bridges, another about black urban history, and slid them back into the bag as if refusing to let even this moment steal the ordinariness of why he had come there in the first place. Sirens began to sound in the distance. Not emergency sirens? Convoy movement, supervisors, internal affairs, command staff. The call had changed everything. But the real reckoning had only just begun. The first black SUV arrived less than 6 minutes later, followed by a command sedan and an unmarked city vehicle that splashed curb water onto the gutter. Assistant Chief Marissa Cole stepped out in a dark overcoat, jaw set tight, followed by a lieutenant from Professional Standards and a civilian legal advisor who looked like he had been dragged from a meeting and still had half a folder in his hand. The neighborhood fell almost silent. People who had gathered for spectacle now sensed they were witnessing consequences taking shape in real time. Marissa crossed the wet sidewalk directly to Malik before acknowledging anyone else. "Mr. Rowan," she said, her voice controlled but visibly burdened. "I'm sorry." Malik met her eyes. "You're late," he said. "Not cruelly, just factually." Marissa accepted it. "Yes." Then she turned to Mercer with a kind of stillness. "Senior leadership sometimes wears right before the ground opens under someone." "Badge?" Mercer blinked. "Ma'am, badge and body cam." Reed actually stepped back. The legal advisor's pen was already moving. The lieutenant from Professional Standards came forward. Hands out, not dramatic, not loud, just procedural in the most final way. Mercer removed his badge with fingers that seemed suddenly unfamiliar to him. His body camera followed. Nadine watched without satisfaction. Elena watched with trembling relief. Mrs. Hayes looked dazed, as though the whole night had outrun her ability to process it. Marissa then asked for witness accounts immediately, right there on the sidewalk, not in some back room where truth could be softened into administrative language. "Everyone who saw the interaction," she said, turning so the crowd heard her clearly. "I want names, numbers, and recordings preserved." The college girl stepped up at once. "I have it from when he first got cuffed," she said. Nadine said, "I heard the store owner tell him he had the wrong man." Elena lifted her phone with the security footage. The barber from next door said he'd seen the cash box kid bolt through the alley in a red jacket. For the first time all night, the collective memory of the street was being treated as valuable instead of inconvenient. Malik stood under the awning now, rain no longer falling directly on him, but the red marks on his wrists were still visible. Marissa noticed them. So did the legal advisor. Mercer noticed them too, and something in his face seemed to collapse inward. But collapse is not the same as remorse. Malik could tell the difference, and so could Nadine. The humiliation he had endured could not be rewound. At best, what followed might keep someone else from standing in his place next week, next month, next year. That question, whether one public wrong could force private systems to change, had begun to matter more to him than whether his own name now froze the scene when Marissa asked to continue the discussion in a mobile command vehicle. Malik surprised her by saying no. "He did this out here," he said, glancing once at Mercer and then at the crowd. "We can address it out here." That decision changed the tone of everything. No retreat. No quiet hallway. No institutional curtain drawn after public damage. Marissa understood immediately and adjusted. The lieutenant began taking witness statements on the hood of the unmarked car while the legal advisor documented timeline gaps and body cam status. Reed gave his account truthfully, though each truthful sentence seemed to make him stand a little straighter and a little sadder. He admitted the store video had supported Malik's version before the cuffs were removed. He admitted the bag contained purchased books. He admitted Mercer had continued detention after contrary evidence emerged. Mercer stood off to one side now, hands at his beltline where his badge no longer was, looking less like authority and more like a man seeing the limits of borrowed power for the first time. Malik watched all of it with that same unnerving calm. Marissa, perhaps trying to understand the man in front of her beyond the title, said quietly, "You could have had this handled privately much sooner." Malik looked down the block where kids were still standing under a laundromat awning watching adults reckon with shame. "That's why it shouldn't be private," he said. Then, after a beat, "If I needed my resume to be treated like a citizen, then your problem isn't a mistake. It's a culture." The legal advisor stopped writing for half a second just to absorb the sentence. Nadine let out a slow breath. Elena looked at Malik the way people look at someone who has just articulated the thing everyone felt but could not phrase. Marissa nodded once, though the agreement in her face carried pain. "You're right. That might have been the most startling moment of the night for some of the people watching. Not the call, not the badge surrender, but a senior official admitting the problem without hiding behind phrasing. Yet even that was not enough for Malik. Who trains officers to override direct witness correction? He asked. Who teaches them that inconvenience is probable cause? Who signs off when this happens without someone important standing in the rain? Marissa did not answer quickly because quick answers would have been dishonest. The street had become not just a scene but a mirror, and the department, reflected under flashing light and wet glass, looked nothing like the press statements it preferred to issue. Across the city, phones were lighting up in offices that usually pretended surprise only after stories went public. The mayor's chief of staff had been informed. A deputy city attorney was asking for footage copies. Transportation officials at the earlier briefing were now calling one another in increasingly careful tones because the man wrongfully cuffed outside a bookstore was not only Malik Rowan, the billionaire developer, but Malik Rowan, the oversight chair whose signature was tied to a transit contract that half the city's infrastructure future depended on. Yet for Malik, that project mattered less in the moment than the old woman standing under the awning with wet cheeks and shaking hands. He stepped toward Mrs. Hayes and asked, "Are you all right?" She nodded too fast, then broke down anyway. "You came in to help me," she said. "And this is what happened." He lowered his voice so only those nearest heard. What happened was already in him. "It just used me." That line stayed with Elena for days. It was so clean, so exact, and so devastatingly fair that she repeated it later when giving her formal statement. Meanwhile, the lieutenant from Professional Standards had finally accessed enough dispatch records to reconstruct the incident timeline. No suspect description had been transmitted before Mercer's detention. No weapon reported. No physical evidence linking Malik to the theft. The escalation had been officer-generated from the start. Reed read the timeline over the lieutenant's shoulder and visibly exhaled in disbelief at how bare it all looked on paper. Crowds always make events feel chaotic. Documentation turns them clinical. Mercer saw the same screen and went gray. "I was trying to secure the scene," he muttered, perhaps to Marissa, perhaps to himself. Nadine answered before Marissa could. "No, you were trying to secure your assumption." The college girl, whose name turned out to be Talia Benson, almost lowered her phone out of respect at that point. But Marissa told her to keep preserving everything. "Please don't delete a thing," she said. "I won't," Talia replied. Malik slipped one hand into the pocket of his hoodie, the other still holding the damp paper bag with his books. On his wrist, the cuff mark had darkened into a clear red band. Marissa noticed again and looked away, perhaps because she understood symbols too well. Some evidence appears in reports. Some evidence sits visibly on skin. And while city power was beginning to move around Malik with all the frantic energy of institutions trying to correct themselves once a powerful name is involved, the block itself had already rendered its judgment. The neighborhood knew what it had seen: a quiet black man publicly arrested, repeatedly vouched for, visibly innocent, and still treated like he needed authority above him to be believed. Marissa eventually asked, the question others had been circling. Mr. Rowan, what do you want us to do right now? It was the kind of question powerful people are asked when institutions fear litigation, scandal, or both. But Malik didn't answer like someone shopping for punishment. He answered like someone who had spent years studying how public systems fail the people beneath them. Start with the truth, he said. No coded language. No miscommunication. No detained during an ongoing investigation if your own witness timeline shows otherwise. Say what happened. Marissa nodded slowly. And after that? Malik looked at Mercer, then at Reed, then at the row of onlookers still standing in the drizzle, because once you witness something like this, leaving feels like abandoning record. I want every discretionary stop like this from the last 18 months reviewed. Body cam, witness contradiction, demographic patterns, all of it. I want the review done by people who don't report to the same command chain that benefits from burying it. And I want junior officers and civilians protected when they tell the truth against a senior narrative. Reed's face changed at that. He understood himself being included in that sentence and perhaps saved by it too. Marissa glanced at the legal advisor, who was already scribbling as fast as he could. Done? She said. Mercer looked up sharply as if the world had just moved without his permission. Ma'am, over one call? Over one scene? Malik answered before she could. No, he said. Over what one scene reveals. Nadine closed her eyes for a second in weary approval. Elena leaned against the bookstore frame, exhausted but alert. Talia kept recording. The wet city around them seemed to hold its breath. Then Marissa did something unexpected. She turned to the gathered crowd, pulled a portable speaker mic from the command vehicle, and made a public statement right there on the sidewalk. She did not name Malik's portfolio. She did not mention contracts. She said a man had been wrongfully detained despite contradictory witness accounts and video evidence, and that the department was opening an immediate professional standards inquiry with external oversight. Gasps ran through the block. Not because people suddenly trusted the system, but because they had heard plain truth spoken from a police command voice, and that alone felt unusual enough to be historic. Mercer lowered his eyes. Reed stared at the pavement. Malik looked neither triumphant nor relieved. He looked like a man who knew apology was a beginning at best. Never a repair by itself. The actual thief was found 40 minutes later 2 alleys over behind a row house stairwell, still wearing the red jacket, still clutching the cash box, which made the whole night feel even more obscene in retrospect. But that update, when it came over radio, changed less than people expected. It did not exonerate Malik because he had never needed exoneration. It only confirmed, with almost cruel neatness, how unnecessary his humiliation had been. Mrs. Hayes recovered most of the cash, though she later said she barely cared about the money once she understood the cost of what had happened outside her shop. The command team wanted to escort Malik to his hotel then, but he refused again. I'm not done here, he said. He went back inside Maple and Pine with Elena and Mrs. Hayes, and for a few minutes the cameras outside lost sight of him. Under the warm yellow lamps and the smell of wet paper and old wood, he picked up the 2 books he had bought, accepted a fresh tea from Elena, and stood near the front shelf while Mrs. Hayes apologized for the 5th or 6th time. Please stop, he told her gently. You asked for help. That should still be allowed? Elena watched him over the steam rising from the tea and realized that what made him powerful was not merely wealth or title. It was that he seemed constitutionally unwilling to let his status be the moral center of the event. He kept pulling the issue back to everyone else, to the next person, to the system. Outside, Mercer was being formally separated from the scene pending investigation. Reed had given over his body cam for immediate review. Talia was uploading a backup of her video to cloud storage because Marissa herself had advised, assume everyone will want copies. Nadine finally picked up her groceries again but did not leave. She stood under the awning as if keeping watch over the block until the night settled. When Malik came back out with his books tucked under one arm, she looked at him for a long moment and said, "You've been here before." He knew what she meant without her explaining. "Yes," he said. "Just not always with cameras." That line hit harder than anything else he'd said that evening because it widened the story beyond itself. The rain had slowed to a mist. Siren reflections no longer strobed across the brick as violently. But the scene still felt electrically alive, as though the block itself knew it had crossed from ordinary police drama into something the city would not easily forget. When the press vehicles began arriving, Marissa swore under her breath, not because publicity frightened her, but because publicity often tempts institutions to perform sincerity instead of practice it. She asked Malik if he wanted to leave before the first cameras set up. He looked down the block where reporters were already unfolding tripods in the drizzle and said, "No, let them see the same sidewalk." So they did. Within the hour, local news ran with the footage. A calm black man cuffed outside a bookstore. Witnesses protesting, an assistant chief's call on speaker, a public badge surrender. But the clip that spread fastest was not the uncuffing. It was Malik saying, "That is exactly the problem." Because something in the simplicity of the line cut through every comfortable excuse people usually hide behind. By midnight, commentators, activists, neighborhood groups, civil rights lawyers, and retired officers were already weighing in online. Some wanted Mercer fired immediately. Some wanted broader reform. Some were simply furious because they recognized the scene from too many lives. Too many cousins, too many sons, too many nights when no assistant chief called in time. Reed sat in the second patrol car with the engine off, waiting to be released from the scene, and replayed his own choices over and over, the moments he had hesitated, the seconds he had waited too long to push back, the ease with which he had initially allowed Mercer's framing to stand. Shame works strangely on decent people. It doesn't just accuse, it instructs. He walked over to Malik before leaving and said quietly, "I should have stopped it sooner." Malik studied him, and Reed braced for deserved contempt. Instead, Malik said, "Then don't make this the last time you remember it." Reed nodded like he had been handed something heavier than forgiveness. Inside the bookstore, Elena was giving a statement to a civilian investigator and repeating every detail. She could recall in chronological order. Mrs. Hayes had called her nephew, who was now on his way to fix the back door that had started everything. Nadine finally allowed herself a weary smile when Talia asked for her name for the record. "Nadine Brooks," she said. "And put this part in too. The truth was available before the title was." Talia promised she would. On the curb, under a city sky finally clearing at the edges, Malik opened one of his books while waiting for the command team to finish their last questions. The image of that, a man, wrongfully cuffed an hour earlier, now quietly, reading under streetlight while the machinery around him panicked, would become one of the most shared photographs of the week. By the next morning, the city looked different to the people responsible for running it, not because the streets had changed, but because one public incident had suddenly made private knowledge impossible to keep private. The mayor announced independent review support. The police commissioner ordered a department-wide audit of discretionary detentions involving contradicted witness accounts. Civic groups demanded public reporting. The bookstore's corner became a gathering point for neighbors who left flowers, notes, and hand-lettered signs that said things like, "We saw the truth and dignity should not require status, maple and pine." Once just a narrow little shop surviving on used hardcovers and loyal regulars, turned into a symbol overnight. Reporters wanted Malik on camera, but he refused most interviews. When he did speak briefly at noon outside the store, he didn't center himself. He said, "What happened to me was visible. That's not why it was wrong. It was wrong before anyone knew my name." The line went everywhere. Elena watched it on her phone from behind the register and felt the same chill she had felt the first time. He spoke under the awning, Mrs. Hayes. standing beside a stack of community donations that had flooded in after the story broke. Cried again at hearing him say her little store mattered enough to become a moral landmark. At headquarters, Mercer sat under administrative review while investigators reconstructed body cam timing, dispatch phrasing, and statement inconsistencies. Reed filed supplemental notes voluntarily, a small act that would later matter more than he knew. Marissa, for her part, convened an emergency internal meeting where she used no soft language at all. She called it what it was, a wrongful detention amplified by bias, worsened by witness disregard, and only interrupted by outside power. Some command staff looked stung. Good, she thought. They needed stinging more than comfort. Malik returned to his hotel only briefly, showered, changed into a plain dark jacket, and showed up at the transit oversight meeting as scheduled, shocking half the officials who had expected him to postpone. He signed the donor packet for Maple and Pines building restoration before he signed anything else. Then he opened the transit briefing with words no one in that room forgot. I am still here because yesterday did not teach me anything new about systems. It only reminded me what accountability looks like when it's inconvenient. Around the long, polished table, silence settled like judgment. Because everyone there understood infrastructure was not just rails, steel, budgets, and bids. It was also whether the people running a city could recognize a citizen before a title forced them to. Over the next week, the footage kept spreading, but not in the shallow way viral clips usually do. People weren't just sharing outrage. They were sharing memory. Men wrote about being stopped outside their own buildings. Mothers wrote about sons taught from childhood how to keep their hands visible and their voices measured. Store clerks wrote about being ignored when they tried to correct officers. Junior cops wrote anonymously about senior partners, who turned suspicion into performance because backing down felt like losing face. Nadine Brooks appeared on a local panel and said, "The terrifying part wasn't that he was important. The terrifying part was how little that mattered until the phone rang." Talia, the college student whose recording first captured the handcuffing, saw her follower count explode but used the attention to post the full unedited timeline instead of clipped outrage bait. Reed requested reassignment out of street patrol and into training oversight, a move some colleagues mocked and others quietly respected. Elena accepted an invitation to speak at a city listening session about witness dismissal and said, with tears in her eyes, "I was telling the truth while they treated me like background noise." Mrs. Hayes reopened Maple and Pine with new locks, repaired shelves, and a small framed sign near the register that read, "Helping should still be allowed." As for Malik, he visited once more before leaving the city. No cameras that time. No press. Just him, a cup of coffee, and a folded envelope containing expanded restoration funding for the whole block, not just the bookstore. Mrs. Hayes asked him why he was doing more after what happened. He looked out at the sidewalk where the cuffs had clicked shut days earlier and said, "Because if harm gets the last word, it starts sounding like policy." She never forgot that sentence. Neither did Marissa Cole, who later ordered it included anonymously in a departmental ethics memo. Mercer remained under investigation, and while official outcomes would take time, one thing had already happened that no disciplinary board could reverse. The city had seen itself too clearly to pretend comfort. The wrong man had been arrested. The right witnesses had spoken. The call had come. But even bigger than that, a public moment had forced an old truth into plain view. Justice should not depend on whether the person being humiliated has enough power to interrupt the script. Months later, when the first audit findings were released, they confirmed exactly what Malik had implied in the rain. His case was exceptional only in visibility. Discretionary detentions with contradicted witness input had happened far too often. Certain neighborhoods were overrepresented. Certain bodies were read as probable cause more easily than others. Compliance language had softened too many reports. Training had rewarded command presence more than corrective listening. The reforms that followed did not heal everything Nothing Honest ever claims that, but they changed enough to matter. Witness contradiction became a mandatory escalation checkpoint. Civilian video could not be casually dismissed in field reports. Junior officers received protected channels for challenging false narrative build-out. Community businesses were given direct review contacts. Maple and Pine received its restoration grant, and the whole corridor around it became part of a preservation and lighting project under Rowan Civic Infrastructure. Reed helped build a new field training module centered on one phrase projected at the start of every session. The truth was available before the title was. Mercer was terminated after findings showed repeated narrative overreach in prior stops. And Malik? He kept doing what powerful people almost never do consistently. He kept showing up unannounced, in plain clothes where systems thought no one important was watching. Because that was the final lesson of that night, and maybe the one worth carrying into your own life too. Quiet power is not loud because it doesn't need to be. Dignity is not fragile because someone misreads it. And the most dangerous kind of authority is the kind that believes apology becomes enough once it learns the person it humiliated can damage it back. On that wet Baltimore sidewalk, Officer Mercer thought he was controlling a scene. What he was really doing was exposing a culture. The phone call changed everything. Yes, but only because a deeper wrong was already standing there under the lights, visible to anyone willing to hear witnesses before status intervened. So tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone judged before they were known, or stayed quiet in a moment you wish you had spoken? And if stories like this matter to you, stories about quiet strength, public truth, and justice that reaches beyond one person, like, subscribe, and stay with EcoStory for the next one.